Make sure your
Thank you.
mic is on.
Yep, I will turn myself on.
Scrub my stuff.
All right, wow, everybody stayed. This is great. Now, I know we probably have some kids that need some naps, so I will try to be done by about 2-ish, and maybe you can still get it in today. And I have an 11-hour drive. As soon as I leave, I'm taking off since I'm done, so I have multiple reasons to keep this short, but I won't. Again, one of my favorite talks. One of the, I found big hang-ups a lot of Christians and people in Christian churches have, is how to fit all of human history into a biblical time frame since the flood. The Bible puts the flood at about 43 to 4,400 years ago. And it puts Abraham showing up in Egypt about 3,900 years ago. So that's only a little over 400 years from when the ark hit until you had advanced human civilization growing all over the world, because Abraham ended up going to Egypt. And all the time we hear about the Native Americans migrated into North America about 15,000 years ago, and it's been proven. And the Egyptians, the height of their civilization was like 5,000 years ago, and the Incas were around 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. So you hear all of these time frames of human civilizations that go way back past the flood. And yet, all civilizations had to have developed after the flood. So there's this big, huge disconnect. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next 45 minutes or so. I did want to come back to the scripture verse that we read, because Pastor Aaron didn't know this. He knew we were going to talk about the mankind having been made in God's image, but the whole theme of this talk, and I wrote a book after I left out Pinnacle called Brilliant, Made in the Image of God. And it's just back in stock. It's on my website, but I wasn't able to bring any. And it goes through the same talk in much, much more detail. What you're about to hear is only about 20% of what's in that book, Brilliant. But the subtitle was Made in the Image of God. Now, when God says something one time, it's important. You wouldn't put it in his word unless it was important. When God tells us something 2 times, it's really significant. It's important enough that he wants to make sure we get it right. When God says something 3 times, it's like there's not hardly any place in Scripture where 3 times in a row God says the same thing. One of them I can think of is twice, once in Revelation and once I think it's in Isaiah. It says God is holy, holy, holy. Trying to drive home the justice and perfection and righteousness of who God is. It's said 3 times. It's over the top significant. I can only think of one place in the entire Bible where God tells us something 4 times. Now start to understand how important.
Head northeast on Maple Street, then sharp left.
Just a second. I already routed in my route. I don't want my phone talking. Not leaving yet. And it's what we just read. Okay, now kids, are you listening? Every time I read and you hear the God telling us that we have been made in his image, I want you to raise one of your fingers. So this is Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. Raise a finger. That's 1. In the image of God, he created him. That's 2 times. Male, I gotta back up. God said, let us make man in our image. That was 1. After our likeness. That's 2. And then down in the next verse, so God created man in his own image. That was 3. In the image of God, he made him. That's 4. 4 times. That's how important it is that we understand we are really, really, really special. You are really special to God. He made you exactly who you are with your abilities and your talents. So don't ever forget that. Every human being is valuable, and we do not disvalue any human life, no matter how obnoxious they are. They are valuable to God. Now, with that as a background, we've already been through this. the 7 enormous events where God has interacted in all of human history are creation, the fall, when death entered into creation, the worldwide flood, where sin of all mankind was judged for the first time, and there'll be a second time, and then when people spread out across the planet after the flood. And that's what we're going to look at, are these cultures that spread out after the flood. Now, that is history. That is reality. But the world around us is clueless to it. Archaeologists are people who go and study ancient cultures. That's what they do for a living. They are trained to think like that guy was trained to ride a bicycle, for those who were doing Sunday school. Only thinking is possible in one way. And when someone added a gear so you had to turn the handlebar the wrong way, they couldn't do it. They couldn't even think in that way. And they're trained that we have come from some sort of an ape-like creature, and earliest human history is the Stone Age, where people were using stone tools and banging on rocks and trying to survive. And following the Stone Age was the Bronze Age, where people started to be able to build tools and have metals. And following the Bronze Age was the Iron Age, where we now were able to make iron implements. And this is clear up only a couple thousand years ago. And then there's the Modern Age that really only began maybe 500 to 1,000 years ago. So whatever they find in any culture, any place in the world, they're trained, this is reality. Apish Stone Age, rudimentary civilizations are kind of gathering things in little huts and so on. Then larger cities and civilizations making iron, and then finally the Modern Age. And whatever they find, they're going to stick it into that time frame. Now, there really are only 2 possibilities for where humans came from. Either we came from some sort of an ape-like creature, but if that is true, then the further back in time we go, the less intelligent people should have been. So the very beginning civilizations should have been not very developed, not very intelligent and technological. Less building abilities, less language. If we came from apes that just shouted and grunted and screamed, the early languages ought to just be grunts and screams and not very complex. Social structures should have been not very developed. And inventiveness should have been less developed. That's what we should find if what the world is teaching is true. Now, just to drive this point home, and there's a lot of interaction in this talk, there was a film made clear back in the early mid-1970s. So we're talking 50 years ago. And the people who are like movie critics, they say this film was the most important science fiction film ever made in the history of cinematography. So it's science fiction and it's adventure. Any guesses what that movie might have been? Okay, I hear what? The Time Machine? Oh, I've seen that. It's a H.G. Wells movie, but that's not what they picked. Someone else shouted something out.
Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Journey to the Center of the Earth, that's not it. It's a really significant, impactful scientific film. Those are a little bit obscure. Mid-70s, any other guesses? Planet of the Apes. That's a good guess. That's that time period. They get like 5 of them, and like Charleston Heston and Rodney McDowell, and people dressed up in ape suits. But that's not the one they picked. A lot of people picked Star Wars. Okay, that had an enormous impact and made it popular. The aliens that were really popular. None of those. Okay, the one they picked was one that was a blockbuster book called 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then they made a movie out of it. Why? Because this movie put to movie, screen, and drama everything kids are being taught in our education system about what is true history and true reality of humanity. The first 10 minutes, there was no talking. It was just a bunch of ape-like creatures jumping up and down and screeching and throwing sticks at one another and climbing into caves and falling asleep and yelling and screaming and fighting, just a bunch of wild animal apes that are our supposed ancestors. Then you come to the pinnacle moment that sets up the whole movie. And that's what I'm going to show, this little 60-second clip. So, hang on a second, I'm going to back up, because I want to make sure the sound is on. Okay. So, here is Grandpa, great-great-great-great-great-grandpa, and he's finding some bones. And the music, classical music, starts to build to a crescendo. And Grandpa has discovered that if he takes one of these bones and he swings it, it makes the other bones move. And he starts to think in his little ape brain, wow, maybe I could use this bone as a tool. Maybe I could use it as a weapon. Maybe I could use it to attack animals, and I could feed myself better, and I could have more children, and I could grow, and I could quit eating bananas and become a human being. And mankind, for the first time in a million years, has discovered the use of a tool. And he throws it up in the air, and then we fast forward 100,000 years and we see a spaceship heading towards Saturn. Okay, so that's the beginning of the movement. Now, the thing is, cinema and movies is the pulpit of today. Now, it used to be the theater, now it's just the internet because it's everywhere. But it sets concepts to visual images and powerful stories and dramas and music, and it hits you on an emotional and an intellectual level all at the same time. It's like Jesus did that with parables. We do it with movies, and they impact our thinking. So this concept that we came from ape-like creatures is just locked in, even more powerfully here than it is through the textbooks in the schools, and with predictable results. 87% of the people in the country now believe God, if he existed at all, used some sort of evolution to make us. In other words, we came from some sort of an ape-like creature. Because they see the skulls in the museums, they see them in their textbooks, they hear them referred to constantly, and it looks really convincing and definitive. Now, that's a whole lecture of itself. We'll just do it some other time, or it's on the video set, it's one of the lectures. But it leaves out this option, that we were created, fully formed, incredibly intelligent, incredibly created in God's very image. And at the end, I'm going to give you my list of 4 ways I think we're totally different than any other animal God created. And it's because we're in his image. Now, the focus of this presentation is mankind's knowledge of early biblical events. Stuff that's in the Bible, but shows up in other places. And the obvious inventiveness and knowledge of these civilizations from their very inception, which wouldn't have happened if we were just some ape turning into a human being. Now, what I've done in both the book and this video is break history into eras of major things that were happening. From 6,000 years ago till the flood, 4,350 years ago, there is no evidence left physically. That flood pulverized this planet. Every building, every tree, every blade of grass, every continent has been shifted, moved, covered up, pulverized, and buried. There's no physical evidence left, okay? The only thing that survived was with Noah on that ark. The power of moving water is over the top astounding. The whole Rocks Cry Out series, there's 20 different episodes. 7 of them deal with the flood and the power of moving water and the rock layers and the fossils and so on. And it's the best explanation for these things. Essentially, nothing survived the flood. The world at that time was deluged and destroyed. But memories of that pre-flood world would have survived. Noah would have brought information with him. There's some debate whether the 100 years mentioned in the flood is how long it took to build the ark, or it's just a reference to something else. But he had decades, more than likely, to build this vessel, and he would have gathered all sorts of stuff to survive after what he knew was the destruction of the earth. And after the flood, there would have been rapid civilization rebuilding. Now, cultures who had access to documents and technology and knowledge from people who had lived for 1,400 years with 800-year-long lifetimes, brilliant people would have been over the top. They would have had all sorts of knowledge that we've just gained recently, maybe in different areas, but they would have been very, very intelligent. And Noah would have had that. And the civilizations that had access to that would have rapidly developed and prospered extremely, almost like they suddenly appeared. I just want to imagine, just do a thought experiment. Imagine, like, tomorrow, everything's destroyed or somehow you're captured and you're just dropped in the middle of a jungle somewhere. You have no technology, you have the clothes on your back, you have no books, you have no internet, you have nothing, and you have to survive. You would probably, even a couple years later, be considered some native, very rudimentary, very unknowledgeable human being, because you're just trying to survive based on nothing. You're putting together sticks and spears, you're building shelters, you have no metal making abilities, you have no machine making abilities, you're just trying to survive. Those are the cultures that didn't have access to technology. Now, this is the first thing I want to show you. In the 1970s, they do archaeological digs in China, just like everywhere else. They dug up this enormous bronze statue that was buried in some ruins in China. Now, it's cast in bronze. They estimate it to be about 4,000 years old, and I bet they're pretty close. So, within 500 years or so of the flood. And by the way, if you put Tower of Babel 200 to 300 years after the flood, you've got hundreds of years for people to have spread out and started other civilizations. It's 12 foot tall, and it has leaves that look very much like a knife that have been sharpened in a knife-like shape. This is kind of what they look like. So hang on. You see these leaves? They're almost pointed like a knife that comes down. And in the midst of the knife, there's a fruit. So there's a fruit nestled amongst knife-like leaves, kind of symbolic of a forbidden fruit or a dangerous fruit. Okay? Then there's a snake at the base of the tree. Okay? So if this is 4,000 years old, it's long before Moses ever wrote Genesis. It's been buried by an ancient thousands of year old culture. So how did they even know about any of these concepts? And it looks like a really mean beast. And by the way, this snake still has some legs. And it's got a body that coils and wraps up around the tree. So it's very much snake-like. So you have a very dangerous snake-like creature at the base of the tree. And then reaching up into the tree is a human hand reaching toward the fruit. Isn't that astounding? One of the earliest cultures of humanity, the Chinese and the Egyptians and some people in like the India area are considered to be the cradles of human civilization because they all just suddenly appeared. You have a group of people who above all else did not want the next generation to not understand why death and disease and evil exists. Because in a real event that really happened in history, mankind reached up into a forbidden tree to disobey their creator, tempted by a snake. Isn't that interesting? How in the world could a completely separate culture come up with those exact concepts unless it was actual, factual, true history? See, it's there. And it shows up in writings of other cultures too, but this is the most stunning one. Now, talking about how highly developed cultures are from the very beginning, we're going to look at the Chinese writing. The original Chinese writing that goes all the way back to when they were writing on like bones with symbols. They basically took a set of symbols and assigned meaning to them. They had characters that looked like this. And each individual set of characters represented a word instead of a letter being lined up through words. So by the way, the first one is that symbol for anger. The second one is a symbol for diarrhea, which means you need the third symbol, which means toilet, and so on. So you got all these symbols. Now, there were 80,000 symbols in the original Chinese language. Now, we have 26 letters, and we can line the letters up to mean what they mean. These, to know what they meant, you had to know each symbol. So imagine singing the alphabet song to your children at night instead of 26 letters. You have 80,000 of them to sing. They'd be up a long time. Is that simple going to more complex? No, it's a language that starts out over the top complex. These people were geniuses at the very start of their civilization. But more stunning, the symbols were tied to historical biblical events. See, here's the symbol for garden. Okay, it's a rectangular box. It's got sort of a K-like thing here, a little square at the top, and an upside-down T above that. Well, those individual symbols, the T, I'm going to shift this a touch. That upside-down T itself is their symbol for dust. So you've got a symbol for dust. The little rectangular box means breath It's the breath a person that's alive takes. The upside down K means two people, and the rectangle means some sort of an enclosure. So two people given breath, dust given breath, became two people in an enclosure, and that's their word for garden. Isn't that stunning? Where in the world did they get these concepts unless these are the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren of Noah, and he brought this knowledge with him, and when Babel happened and they went off and started the culture, they used the events of history to develop their very language. Another example, and there's been books written on this with hundreds of examples of biblical knowledge in ancient cultures, specifically China. Boat. That's the symbol for vessel, combined with a symbol that means eight, combined with this same symbol that means breath or people. So 8 people on a vessel is a boat. Where in history do we have 8 people on a vessel? Noah, 3 sons, his wife, 3 daughter-in-laws, adds up to 8 people. Isn't that interesting? See, it's true. It's not, and God makes sure we know it's true by having the Bible, which we ought to already accept, but the world doesn't, have things to show them to help them understand it's true. While we're talking about writing, we're going to look at the Peruvian culture, which also goes way, 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 way back. And when the Spanish arrived there in the 14 and 1500s, looking for gold, and basically enslaved and wiped out most of the culture, and European diseases wiped out more of them, they never bothered to learn how to interpret some of their language. And the ancient Aztecs, they had no written language. They didn't take symbols and assign meaning to them. They did something even more creative. They had what they called a quipus. They would take a rope and they would tie a long dangling rope from it, and then they would tie a series of knots. And they would put the knots at different lengths, different numbers of knots, in different positions on the rope, and the ropes would be different lengths. So those are called degrees of freedom. Like 4 or 5 different lengths might represent 4 or 5 different letters in the English language. The number of knots might represent other letters. Where the knots were positioned might represent other letters. So someone would hand, like a runner, the ancient Aztecs. The Aztecs, they owned all of South America, all the way up from the top of Colombia, near Central America, all the way down through Argentina. It was 2,000 miles long, the length from New York City to Los Angeles. And they would tie a quipus, put it in a bamboo rod, hand it to a runner, and a runner would run along the Inca Highway, which was up and down over the Andes for 2,000 miles, run like all day long, hand it to someone else. They would run all night, hand it to someone else. And in a matter of weeks, they could run a message all the way from New York to Los Angeles. Someone would pull it out, unroll the quipus, and read it like we would read a newspaper. Isn't that interesting? Just so inventive, so creative. Now, that's just a look at a few of the examples of how human cultures know about true history. They know about the events that happened in the Garden of Eden. But what's happening next? After the flood, this whole world's been devastated. Mankind's struggling to reestablish a foothold on planet Earth. Remember, there are only 8 human beings on the whole planet. 8 human beings 4,400 years ago. So several hundred years likely passed before the Tower of Babel, but people were highly motivated to have a lot of children. Now, the Ice Age immediately followed that. I mentioned that briefly, and we're going to look at evidence for that in a moment, because it's another evidence for a recent creation. But we're going to look at the most advanced, most studied, most amazing, instantly there, advanced human civilization, and that's Egypt, because it had so much technological stuff, and they set records for some of the stuff they did that wasn't broken for almost 4,000 years. But by the time Abraham arrived in Egypt, it was already an advanced civilization with lots of people and a pharaoh running it, and so on. And they still had a set of moral rules where you weren't supposed to take someone else's wife, because as soon as the pharaoh was accused of that, he put a stop to it. Now, mankind was highly motivated to have large families. Think about it. You only have 8 of you. You want to have a lot of kids. And people were still living at this point in the 400 and 500 year long range, the kids of Noah and his grandkids. So you could have a lot of kids in that amount of time. But people just don't even think in these terms. How could there be millions of people within a few hundred years? Because it just doesn't seem possible. Well, I'm going to show you the math. Until recently, when I grew up in the 1960s, birth control did not even exist yet in the 1960s. It was just starting to develop. So we had lots of people in our neighborhood that had 8 to 12 kids. There were 3 different families I knew of. And it was just normal. You just had a lot of kids. So what do you think is the record in like the last well-documented few hundred years for the woman who had the most children? How many children do you think one woman had in her lifetime while she was able to have children? Let's have some guesses. Go ahead.
Something like 98.
No, it wasn't that high. I don't know. That's probably not being well documented. Any other guesses? 27 is too low, 98 is too high. Well, I'm talking children. How many children?
38.
Not ancestors. 38 is too low. Oh, you're thinking one woman, 38 children. This is modern times. Yeah, I'll give you the number. It's well documented. 69 children, one woman. Now, people aren't living for hundreds of years. This was 1765. She probably, for whatever reason, had twins or triplets every time she had children. She was pregnant almost immediately. She started young. She ended late. But you can have a lot of children. Now, these people, there weren't as many diseases. There weren't as many genetic buildups because every generation has more genetic mistakes than the one before. Wikipedia documents over 50 women that have had 20 children or more. It's not that uncommon. It's rare, but so I thought, let's just make an assumption. Let's assume all 3 of Noah's sons and daughter-in-laws that came off the ark, they each had 20 children over a 50-year period, and that was it. They probably had a lot more. Okay? So just 20. And then let's look at the numbers. Okay, so here's the real population explosion. If every couple had 20 kids in 50 years, then there would have been 68 people 50 years after the ark landed. Now, those children paired up, which, by the way, if there's not as many genetic mistakes, there's no reason that brothers and sisters can't be married and have children. That's what Adam and Eve's kids had to have done. In Genesis chapter 5, it says Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters. Okay, so they had lots of them. It was only at the time of Moses, 3,200 years ago, that in the book of Leviticus or Deuteronomy, it says brothers, sisters, cousins cannot be married. Up and before that, there weren't so many genetic mistakes, it's no big deal. 100 years later, now you have 30 couples, 20 kids each, you have 600 people on the planet. 50 more years go by, you have 300 couples, they each have 20 kids, now you have 6,000 people. 200 years later, you have 30,000 couples. Let's put the Tower of Babel at that point. You have 60,000 people or more because some of the original ones are still alive. So you've got 60,000 people. They break up into different language groups. The Tablet of Nations, it listed 70 distinct groups. Let's just say those 60,000 people break up into 70 groups. Now you have 30,000 couples divided by 70, or about 428 couples that form a little people group. One of them goes to Egypt, a bunch of them go to Africa, some of them go to Europe, some of them head off into the Orient, some of them migrate all the way over into North America, and so on. They're spreading across the globe with different languages. We'll keep adding up. We keep adding 50 years. So now we're down to 4,100 years ago. Those 428 couples have 20 kids each. So now you have 4,000 couples. 50 more years goes by, you have 42,000 couples. 4,000 years ago, you have 400,000 couples. 3,950 years, 4 million couples. By the time Abraham arrived in Egypt, you could have easily had 42 million people living there. That's how fast populations grow. Now, there probably weren't. Sin was prevalent, slavery is prevalent, wars are prevalent, diseases still happen. But there's plenty of time for plenty of people. See, evolution has way more problems. If people have been around for 50, 100,000 years, turning from apes into people, there ought to be billions of bones and artifacts and examples of this sort of thing. But there's not. There's almost nothing out there to support their belief system because history isn't as old as we're being told. So let's look at Egypt. For 3,600 years, the Great Pyramid was the tallest structure man-made on this earth. It held the record for 3,600 years. At the very beginning of civilization, the most magnificent structure ever built was built. It's the opposite of what you would expect from evolution. It's not true. Now, looking at it, it's just this stunning, stunning example. It's estimated there's 5 billion pounds of limestone. And by the way, limestone is formed from calcium carbonate that came underwater, that formed during Noah's flood. So the building's built by stones that were formed during the flood. It couldn't have survived the flood. It was made from rocks made during the flood. Some of them were transported 500 miles. Now, these are great big 6 foot long by 5 foot tall by 4 foot wide rectangular stones, each weighing probably 10,000 pounds or more. It is believed by almost everybody who studies Egypt to have been started when a certain pharaoh came into power and was finished by the time he died 20 years later. Now, it contains 2.3 million blocks. If you divide 2.3 million divided by 365 days per year, divided by 24 hours per day, divided by 60 minutes per hour, you come up with 2.3 million. So every one of those blocks had to be put in position every 5 minutes, 24 hours a day for 20 years to account for all the blocks. I don't think we could do that today. This was done at the beginning of human civilization. The capstones, it was covered with these beautiful white sloped marble capstones, which were gleaming white, okay, from all the way to the base to the top, because you have a bunch of stair-step patterns. Well, those are ripped off over the ensuing 1,000-year century millennium, but they were 12 foot long. In the 1800s, an archaeologist went all over Cairo and found these capstones that were being used in various buildings and stuff over the hundreds and thousands of years since then. And he found hundreds of them, and he measured them, and they had all been cut with an accuracy of plus or minus 1/16 of an inch. Perfect accuracy cutting, because the underside had a stair-step pattern, and they had to fit perfectly, or the whole thing would have been out of kilter. The base had to be perfectly level. If you've ever tried to build blocks as a child and you try to do it on an uneven surface, it becomes very unsteady. So they took a 14-acre area and leveled it within 0.001 inch per square foot. That's astounding accuracy. We have to send metal plates to a machine shop by a computer-driven machining in order to get accuracy that level on metal plates. And they did it with a 14-acre area. It's exactly a third of the way from the equator to the North Pole, meaning they knew the exact diameter of the Earth. The earliest civilization knew the diameter of the Earth, or they wouldn't have put it in that important astronomical position. And it aligns within 2% of a single degree on the compass with the magnetic field of the Earth. In 1859, we built the Greenwich Observatory, and we tried to align it north-south with the magnetic field of the Earth. With all of our modern knowledge, modern technology, modern science, modern abilities in 1859, we came within 6% of 1 degree of being correct. At the beginning of human civilization, they were 3 times more accurate. An ancient, ignorant, ape-like developing civilization, none of it makes sense. On the other end of the spectrum, you have, in the same period of time, people trying to survive an ice age where snow is raging and covering large parts of Europe. And we have people called Neanderthals. Now, this is how they're depicted, as some sort of an ape-like creature, but remember, that's just an artist. Every scientist now knows that Neanderthals were nothing but variations of human beings. Just like we have different races today, this was a different race of human beings, fully human. They lived during the Ice Age. They took care of their elderly. They took valuable spears and swords and shields and clothing, and they buried their dead with it. Now, if you're trying to survive, you're not going to get rid of stuff that you could use unless you believe there's something that comes after this life, and you want to take care of people you love. And that's what they did. They had a belief in an afterlife. They brought down woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and dangerous creatures in coordinated hunting parties. Now, one of the things I documented in the book is I came across an article that said Neanderthal invents super glue. And I thought, well, this is interesting. So I read the whole thing, and I was just amazed at what I found, because it showed up in a little science note as an interesting archaeological tidbit. But they discovered great big spears that had these great big 5-pound massive spearheads that were still attached to the wood, even though the rawhide roping had rotted away. And they're trying to figure out, what did they do to get the spearhead to stick to the wood? And they analyzed it, and they realized they had made this really, really strong bonding adhesive that they bonded the stone to the wood, and then they would wrap it with the rawhide. And they started to try to reproduce it. So they did a chemical analysis, and they realized it was a sap from a certain kind of tree, and then they tried to reproduce it. And every time they tried, they failed, because if they heated the sap too much, it would burst into flames. If they heated it hot enough that it would start to cross-link and form a glue, it would carbonize. They had to keep the oxygen away. So they tried taking the sap and putting it under a stone so it would keep oxygen away. They built a fire on top of the stone so it would get hot enough. If it's too long, it didn't work. If it was too short, it didn't work. If the temperature was off more than 10 or 20 degrees, it didn't work. Had a real narrow range. Finally, after like months and months of working on it, they were able to reproduce the cross-linking of the sap to produce the glue. But they had to use modern electronic thermocouples in the liquid in order to control the temperature. So with tons of effort and knowledge and all sorts of modern technology, we were finally able to reproduce what these guys did way back at the beginning of civilization without any of that technology. So who's really smarter? We're no smarter. We just have more technology that we build on more technology. And they were extremely artistic. We find these beautiful paintings all over all these old caves. Here's a pride of lions. Here's a beautiful gazelle. And you find them in Australia and Africa and Europe and everywhere you go. So they had time to create art. So that's the first 500 years. Developing cultures and developing technology, and you had a very wide disparity between those who had it and those who didn't. Now, for the next 1,000 years of Earth history, you have a period characterized by rapid, massive building projects. The rapid advancement of languages, cultures, and building. The Ice Age is coming to an end. Now, here's a biblical clue. It was about 3,400 years ago that Moses came out of Egypt, came into Canaan, started to settle in the area of Israel, and he sent spies in to find out what's going on in this country. They came back with a bunch of grapes so big they had to hold it between a pole on their shoulders. And they said it is a land flowing with milk and honey. It was described as a gorgeous garden paradise. This is Israel. Look at Israel today. You look at Israel for the last 1,000 years or 2,000 years. It has been a barren desert. Nobody even wanted it. Very little rainfall, all rocks, no real good vegetation. It's a horrible place to live. But 3,400 years ago, it was a gorgeous paradise. Why? Because there was more rainfall worldwide. While the oceans were warmer, until they cooled down, and there's enough water in the oceans to cover the entire Earth 6,000 feet deep. That's a lot of water. It's a lot of heat. When water evaporates, it takes heat with it, and the ocean cools. It would have taken probably 1,000 years before it reached a new equilibrium. So there was still more rainfall in Israel during the time of Moses, because the Ice Age was just then coming to its end stages. Well, they found a map, and it was found in Turkey, and this was found, let's see, I think I've got a year. It was found in 1513. Or it was documented to have been compiled in 1513. And it shows a coastline, okay? All this area over here is a coastline, and it's got a bunch of names. It's got notes in the edge of the map. And in the notes, it says, by the way, that this area, which is in the Arctic, had a warm climate. It also shows the exact coastline of Antarctica when it was not covered by ice. Now here's what that area looks like now. It's got huge sheets of ice down in Antarctica, and the land is like 10 miles back this way. So for 10 miles, this ice is just covering water, and you couldn't even know where the land starts. And yes, this map shows where the land is, under all this ice. Now some of this ice is a mile thick. So you get a mile of ice on top of the land, and this map shows where the land is at. Every textbook, every museum says the last ice age on the earth, and there's only been one, started 200,000 years ago and finally came to its end about 12,000 years ago. Well, if that was covered with ice for the last 200,000 years, and it's still covered with ice today, how could someone in 1512 have drawn exactly what the coastline looks like? And by the way, this map was sent to the United States Air Force after they'd done radar mapping of the coastline underneath the ice. And they confirmed that the map shows an exact representation of what the coastline looks like. And then the colonel in charge of the cartography department, he wrote back in response, he says, we have no idea how that knowledge could have gotten to someone that many years ago, because he's left out a biblical viewpoint. Much warmer ocean water means that even down at Antarctica, the oceans may have been like the Bahamas today. So for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years after the ark landed, the coastline next to a warm ocean would have remained uncovered. And people were traveling the world trying to discover what this new globe looked like after the flood had ended. And these other cultures are developing and migrating around the earth. And they would have brought back the knowledge. It would have been passed down from generation to generation. Probably was in the Library of Alexandria. Ultimately, what survived ended up in the hands of this naval admiral in Turkey. And there's that map. So we have an explanation. The world is clueless, and it fits a biblical truth. Now, I'm going to jump past this cause of the flood. I've kind of went through it. But these building projects are stunning. This is ancient Peru, thousands of years before the Incas, thousands of years before the Aztecs. All of these sites, they're revered as an ancient civilization by these more modern cultures. They built these stone walls, look at the size of this block, that are like jigsaw puzzle, perfect fits between the various stones that are absolutely enormous. You can't even fit a piece of paper or a credit card. Some of them weigh almost 500,000 pounds. The only quarry they can find is up over the top of a mountain cliff of the Andes and back down again. So they would have had to quarry and carry these stones up over a mountain and back down. We have no idea how. They weighed 500,000 pounds. They dwarf people, and they build these huge structures in ancient Peru. Here's the stones they moved into position. Stunning. No idea how they did it. In ancient burial mounds in Indiana and Pennsylvania and Ohio and Kentucky, the Indians in that area were all the time building these burial mounds. And they're dated about 3,000 years old or so. In, what's the date on this book? Let's see, 1910, an archaeologist documented what was being found inside of some of these burial mounds. Here's people digging inside of these mounds looking for treasure. They were built by ancient Native Americans that go way back beyond the modern North American tribes. So these are the ancestors of the original North Americans building these mounds. Here's one in Marietta. It's kind of pyramid shaped. Lots and lots of them are shaped like snakes. So here's the coiled tail that kind of bends around, and here's its open mouth. Great big burial mound shaped like a snake. Here's another one shaped like a snake in southern Ohio. And by the way, almost all ancient cultures worship snakes. The Greeks, Athena, every single depiction of Athena you see, she will have a snake on her sword. That's the mother of Zeus, the god, okay? Why a snake? Well, for sinful man, developing these sinful human civilizations that want to be the one who is God. They want to be autonomous. They want to make the rules. That's the bent of all humanity. Who is it that brought freedom from the repressive rules of God? It was the snake. It was Satan that freed us from the repressive rules of God. So all these lost civilizations are worshiping the snake. as it's the opposite of the one who is good. And that's what these burial mounds show. Now, here's one of the things that was found in one of those mounds. And unfortunately, there's no way of proving that this is a true artifact. It's immediately labeled a fraud. Now, the book documents that it was found inside of a mound, and he photographed what it showed, and I believe it's real. But what you see is a bunch of symbols, kind of like Egyptian hieroglyphics. And this culture would have been almost a culture at that same time period of human history. Then it shows a bunch of people drowning, a whole bunch of people drowning, looking for higher ground. A boat that's floating, and by the way, here's a bird with something in its beak. And then 4 men worshiping, and animals 2 by 2 coming off the boat. Found in an ancient Indian mound in Ohio on slate. Now, it could be a forgery, but it also is perfectly reasonable to think it's not. In ancient Peru, they were doing brain surgery and skull manipulations. They had figured out how to take skulls and elongate them, and they found hundreds of these skulls. And they believe what they did was take a baby that was born as royalty or a priesthood, and they strapped boards to its head so the bones, instead of fusing, were shoved backwards. And then they would just keep shoving them and shoving them over the first 3 or 4 years of a child's life until they had these cone-shaped heads. But they also did brain surgery. Here's burial stones where they're shown someone cutting into someone's skull. And again, they found dozens of skulls that have metal plates, gold plates, fused inside of their bones. And these go back 2,000 to 3,000 years. And these people survived. You can see the bone has regrown around the metal plate right here. Now, next question. Hadn't been that long ago. I guess it's now been 26 years. But I remember, anybody remember the Y2K scare, that everything was going to collapse and all the computers were going to fly? The old people remember this, okay? Also in 2000, Time magazine comes out every year with the Man of the Year. The feature issue in January of 2000 was the Man of the Millennium, the human being who had done the most to help and advance human civilization over the last 1,000 years. So from the year 1000 BC until 2000 BC, who do you think is the human being that was picked by all the historical experts? The most significant human being?
Jesus.
What?
Jesus.
No, that was 2,000 years ago. We're talking 1,000 years after that. He may have shown up, I doubt it, by secular people. But it's obvious that's the truth. You can trace, Einstein's a good guess. I hear that all the time. I mean, you can trace hospitals, education, turning around civilizations, everything back to Jesus and Christianity.
Tesla.
Who?
Nikola Tesla.
Tesla? I'm intrigued by Tesla. I think he was every bit as smart as Einstein. But that's not who they picked. And some of his inventions were stolen. Yeah.
Darwin?
Not Darwin, although you would think that's usually a guess. Let me tell you, the man who's considered the most significant human being in all of human history from that 1,000 years was Johann Gutenberg. Gutenberg. Now, why Gutenberg? That has to do with this archaeological find. See, what Gutenberg did, he found a way to mass manufacture and capture human information. And this was back in the 1400s, okay? So he would take symbols, put them in a tray, put ink on top of them, and then he could make copy after copy after copy after copy with a printing press of information. So now there's a reason for people to learn to read. There's a way to capture information and technology for future generations. It was the invention of the printing press that drove the Reformation of Christianity. Because now, for the first time, it wasn't just the priests who had access to God's Word. And the very first thing to be printed was, guess what? The Bible. First thing to roll off the printing press. An original first edition printing of a Gutenberg Bible is now estimated to be worth $100 million. Because there's only about a dozen of them out there. So it drove the scientific Reformation. There would have been no scientific Reformation without the printing press. It really did change all of humanity and all of human history. Now, what you're looking at is an artifact that was discovered in Greece. And it was a discovery of typesetting. It's in the National Academy as a crown treasure of the nation of Greece, protected in a glass case, because it's a bunch of hardened tile symbols that were placed in a tray, and then like pizzas, pieces of clay were pressed against it to take a copy of the information and then hardened. So you could make copy after copy after copy of information using the same concept and technology. So Gutenberg didn't discover the printing press. It was discovered 2,500 years ago at the beginning of human civilizations. And as a city, kingdom after city, kingdom wiped each other out, the technology just got lost and ultimately plunged into the Dark Ages. In Costa Rica, they were carving 6-foot diameter perfect spheres out of stone. We have no idea how. We have no idea why. Now, these go back 3,200 years. And the people studying that culture, they say the people that lived at that time, they had no technology, no written language, no advanced abilities. They were living in dugout canoes and huts, no tools, so they can't explain how they were carving these things. But they said, well, they must have been doing it. Well, turns out they found these same huge marbles on islands that are, hang on here, 330 feet offshore. How do you put a 30,000-pound marble in a dugout canoe and paddle it 330 miles offshore? See, it gets ignored. These people had all sorts of abilities and technology. It's just been lost in time. Now, real quick, just looking at the next 1,000 years, now you have the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, advancing civilizations, advancing technology, advancing building abilities, amphitheaters all over the Roman Empire where you can hear someone talking about this loud to 20,000 people all the way up in the stands. The University of Houston studied these amphitheaters, and here's more of them. I'll just bring in all of, whoops, I'll back up, okay? They spent years doing a PhD thesis of how come the acoustics of these amphitheaters are so good. And they thought it was just this perfect shape, but it turned out to be the very materials that they brought in to build the stone structure. And the spacing of the benches, it dampened just kind of rustling, nonverbal noise, and it accentuates human speech sounds. So the very design of the exact dimensions and shape and materials all entered into the ability to hear these sounds. Amazing engineering. And here's another one in Ephesus. In ancient Iraq, they have found batteries, okay? We're 2,200 years ago. They knew about electricity. It's a clay pot which has an electrolyte solution and a copper anode inside and a cathode, and you can attach leads to it. And by putting them in line, you can actually, it's been shown that you can do electroplating. And Mythbusters had an episode that showed that that's exactly what it could be used for. This is the last example, okay? Let's get the year 1901. They found a bunch of crusted up bronze gears, multiple gears of some sort of mechanism. Kind of threw it on the shelf while they looked for coins and gold. And in 1971, they X-rayed it and started looking for what was the purpose of this. And you know that's what scientists do and archaeologists. They try to figure things out from the past the best they can. And they spent over 30 years working on this puzzle. What is this thing? It obviously wasn't a clock. There were 82 different fragments. There were 30 perfectly formed bronze gears, all set on spindles in a perfect position. And they figured out it was a mechanism for plotting the position of things in the solar system. It's called the Antikythera mechanism. The guy who finally published the report in 2006, he said, this device is extraordinary, one of a kind. Beautiful design, but the astronomy is exactly right. It makes your jaw drop. Whoever did this was extremely careful. In terms of history and scarcity, it's more valuable than the Mona Lisa, because they've only found one of them. Now, they made a model, put it together inside of plexiglass. You can basically, on the back, there's a dial where you can set a year, a month, and a day. So you can pick any day in the past. Then you turn the dial until the handle hits that day. And on the other side, there's a series of circles that represent Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter. And it will tell you the position in the sky where you can find those planets on that day. So you can go into the future and into the past and plot where the planets are going to be based on this machine. Isn't that cool? How many here you think you could build that? Brilliant. These people were absolutely brilliant. Okay, so here's where I want to wrap up. So here is the fear. Every culture that has ever existed, I think since Adam and Eve first got together with a little community, has deteriorated and fallen apart. The most conniving, the most convincing, the most popular and deceiving person always gets people around them and rise to the top and start to suppress everybody else. It never fails to happen in any culture that's ever developed. That's the history of humanity. Because when we stop acknowledging there's a creator, we stop acknowledging that there is a power and a truth and a justice outside of ourselves. And that it is our job to line up with that creator and that power and that truth. And now we become the power and the truth. And ultimately, the only way to maintain it is to suppress everything else. So when we start denying a creator, everything becomes relative by our scale that we develop. Morality degenerates. Life is cheapened. Every society falls apart. That's why this whole subject is so important, because that's exactly what's happening in America. And if we think we're too much of a superpower for it to totally collapse and deteriorate, we have forgotten the Roman Empire, which lasted for way longer than America's been around, and it deteriorated into the dark ages of the entire planet. They had indoor plumbing. They had aqueducts that could go for 50 miles, perfectly straight, only dropping a half an inch per mile. They would build bridges over top of rivers and siphon water uphill to feed cities. They were building tall skyscraper buildings with indoor plumbing and amphitheaters and public baths. These guys were brilliant, and they owned the whole world. And they're gone. And that's what's happening in America. We are losing all source of absolute reality and morality. Here's my list. There is no other creature. And children, I get irritated at all these animated films with all these animals talking and having personalities and being intelligent and so on. They're fun, they're interesting, they're creative, but they're just kind of making this muddled blend between animals and people. There's a Grand Canyon, here to the moon-sized gulf between us and every other animal. We are not an animal. We are not a biological animal. We are totally different. There's nothing remotely as creative as human beings. There's nothing as communicative as human beings. They had a group of orphans down, it's one of the pages in one of the devotionals, down in Costa Rica where they put deaf and dumb children. They couldn't talk and they couldn't hear. And so they just housed them all together. And to their amazement, they discovered that by the time these children were 4 years old, they had developed their own language. They had assigned meaning to symbols and sounds at 4 years old and developed a human language. It's wired into us to assign meaning to symbols. Animals don't do that. They can't do that. We are compassionate. No animal has any compunction about wiping out any other group of animals to survive. We are given empathy and love and compassion that comes from our Maker. And last, we're given choice. Animals are ruled 90% probably 8% by instincts. We have instincts. That's how children at birth know to feed from their mother. But we have 98% freedom of choice. We're totally opposite of animals. And God, in spite of all the death and slavery and sexual bondage and hatred and evil and everything that feeds into war that he knows will develop because of it, he refuses to limit our free choice to obey or not to obey. Because as soon as he does that, we're no longer free to love him. Now we're just another animal, another slave. So that's why it exists, because of us, not because God doesn't have the power to change it. He just will not do it, because where there's no freedom, there's no love. So hope that helps. These cultures were brilliant from the beginning. What you're hearing in the world around you is just carbon dating problems, misinterpretations, and blindness because people are trained to leave out the Bible. And this is important stuff to put in front of everybody around us. Now, I want to take just the last couple minutes, because I haven't done this. All of those resources are like putting a pebble in someone's shoe. Everything I've written hasn't been this long technical treatise of the evidence for creation. It's like 3 paragraphs on a page, because that's the world we live in. And it's visual and artistic, and a lot of it's free. These QR codes leading to the 3-minute videos are free. The newsletters are free. Most of my videos are on the internet. The creation devotionals are priced that you can give them away to others. And people read them, even if they're not interested in Christianity. There's actually 5 of them now, and that last one's a combination of the other 4. Unique resources. I'm going to do something I bet you adults haven't had done in a long time. A man from Canada sent me this book, and people have no clue what a treasure this is unless they hear something out of it. And it takes about 2 minutes to read one of these little stories. They're 2 to 3 pages long each. And he sent it to me, and it was called The Tales of the Nazwak Area, which is like, what is that? So I threw it on the shelf, pulled it out a few months later and read one of them, and then I read another one, and I couldn't put it down. It's the most unique book on the evidence for creation I've ever read in my life. And he gave me permission to reproduce it, and I called it Science Shadowlands, A Light for the Pathway Home. And I'm just going to read you one of these. Now, they all have, this is the whole story, okay? It's like a page and a half. And every story starts with italics, and it's something that's happened in history or some observation he sees. He's sitting in a field, and he has a couple of hunting dogs that come up, and he's telling a story about his dogs, and then he gets to the point, and you never know where he's going. So just sit back and listen for a second. This one's called Reflection Number 3, Conscience. And by the way, he entered these little short stories in a province-wide for New Brunswick, Canada writing contest. And he was writing it from like 2017, 18, and 19. He won both first place and second place as the best short story written for the whole province for his writings. So 4 of these little reflections, for a whole area of probably 10 million people, it was the best thing written in the whole province. So just listen to this for a second. I've been promising them for weeks. Yeah, guys, I know. The snow's gone. Our field's green again. Time for a picnic and a good long run. He's talking to his dogs. So I made 3 chicken sandwiches, 2 with just chicken, 1 with chicken and mayo and pepper and pickles. Some days it doesn't pay to be a dog. Olives and croutons and 5 strips of crispy bacon. All systems go. We're off. Dashing to the field, barking all the way. I lay out the blanket and we get down to it. A cold bowl of water for the boys, a thermos of tea, napkins for plates, and side courses 3. Bo chows down and then runs into the orchard. He says that partridge he started chasing last fall is wanting to be picked up the chase again. And from the flutters and growls, it sounds like it might be. Lee finishes up and then follows. The dogs are gone. Now for a sip of tea. I slip my hand into the canvas lunch bag with both hands because olives are expensive. Lift out my layered composition, and I hear a yelp from the trees. Not a help. I've stepped on a bear trap yelp. More a master, your presence is required yelp. Slurps and drools will have to be put on hold. I return the sandwich to the bag and head off to check on my dogs. Bad move. Just as I enter the orchard, I look back to see Mr. Fox running off with my meal. Stop, thief! Just my luck. There's 5 million foxes on the eastern seaboard, and I get the one that's deaf. He doesn't even look back. He heads over to the pines at the end of the field, drops the bag, shoves in his snout, back lurches, and gulps down my sandwich. Licks his paws in the sun, yawns, stretches. How could he? The guy just stole my lunch and he lays there all smiles. Next day, there's a knock on the door. Hey fellas, someone's here. I bet it's that thieving fox. He's come to confess. Betty's having a hard time falling asleep. Okay, so there's a little, he does that. Where's he going with this? So now we're not in italics. I stole a Batman comic book once. It was number 142, The Ruler of the Bewitched Valley. Still remember the title. Took it from Rin's drugstore in 1961. It was quite the transaction. Though I came out ahead, I ended up the loser. I bought a lifelong memory with a dime I never had. Why do we feel bad sometimes? And why is only half the puzzle? The more pertinent question is how. How can a physical life form feel bad? Not a physical pain like a hammer to the thumb, but the kind that melts into your emotion and flows into every corner of your mind. How can we feel bad, this kind of pain, if we're just a bunch of physical molecules? Whether we like it or not, there's something within us called a conscience. He's a mouthy little guy who knows all about us. How did this incorporeal person get inside of me? I'm just a bunch of muscles and bones. Where did he come from? And why is he never satisfied, never at peace? And how does he know the second I'm awake? Couldn't he just stay in bed another half hour and give me a tranquil head start to the day? Hey, you in there, leave me alone. If you won't let me go to sleep, here, let me help. How about a drink, a pill? I'll try one, I'll try both. There must be something I can swallow to shut you up. Too bad about dogs. They can't look in wonder at the stars. Still, it must be a treat. There's no little guy running around in their heads. Isn't that good? See, someone with no interest whatsoever in Christianity, no concept that God exists. You can't deny the logic, and it comes through from the back door. So this is just a treasure. And if I never read a page out of it, nobody knows what it's all about. And the last thing I want to mention is a 2-year project to look at all of the evidence for creation and kind of systematically lay out their problems and have illustrations and activities and things you can do with your kids and QR codes and movies all linked in. And it's called A Christian's Guide to Refuting Evolution. And then there's a phenomenal adventure series. It's just a great Christian read. It's a Christian fiction novel, 3 parts. Was written by a man who was in our Bible study for like 20 years. He had 5 homeschooled children. And every day, he would take time, get up early, and write a chapter to read to them at bedtime. And over a 2-year period, he wrote a 3-part trilogy of a Christian adventure that has just, there's no foul language, no nastiness, but all sorts of good Christian lessons and things in there about a civilization like America at the beginning of our country and the trials that went through. So, I want to mention a few of those other resources, and I finished up a little later than I said I would, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for the weekend. Any quick questions before I wrap up and take off? Yes?
Are all these resources available online?
They're all available online. So if you have my newsletter, put on my newsletter, our phone number, our email, our web address, everything. And you can just go to the store and you'll see all those things. Now, they're more expensive. For a single item online, they're usually $12 plus shipping, so you'll get $15, and here they're all $8. So get them now if you want. Yes?
Do you have any material in Spanish?
In what?
Spanish.
We have 2 books coming up on 3 books in Spanish. The prophecy book, the Apostolic Prophecies in Spanish, and 2 of the devotionals are in Spanish. So, and they're also listed online. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to be wrapping up while you're looking. You have a quick question? Oh, when will I come back? That's a nice question to have. Typically, I tell churches I'm really busy. If you would like to come back in a couple of years, I'd love to come back. And there's other folks in our ministry who doing the same sort of material but a different pace that could come to. So, yeah. Thank you. Thanks for that very last question. It's a long drive, but it's worth it. And I'm hoping you are going to have so many people to be twice as many. That's our goal, is to bring others into the kingdom. So, thank you. All right, I'm going to be packing up here where you guys browse the whole table. Okay, I forgot about that.
But yes, would encourage you to check out the table. Make sure you get signed up for the newsletter. And again, I don't know about you, but I could just go on the whole day, with a few more presentations. But I know the kids are probably tired, and I know we're all probably a little tired. So we'll wrap things up, and yeah, Lord willing, we'll be able to cross paths again, and again, a special day. So it's always nice to have a weekend like this, just to break from the ordinary and to focus in on a very, very important topic, which the topic of creation is, and all the things covered today are. So let's go ahead and close with a song, and take your songbook number 75, a short song, and then we'll just